This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. This is our first anniversary edition of the podcast, and obviously you'll notice that there's a little bit of a twist straight away in the sense of it's me introducing it, and Angelica, the founder of the Voice of Early Childhood, is joining us as a guest this week, and she looks deeply uncomfortable there with the fact that the roles are reversed and she doesn't quite know what to do at this point. Obviously, the Voice of Early Childhood is a year old, remarkably, and it has been a year of a podcast every single week where you've been listening to the tones of Angelica speaking to a range of different guests. So this week it's just going to be changed up a little bit in the way that I'm going to be hosting it, and Angelica is going to be the guest, and we're going to explore the journey of the Voice of Early Childhood, and both before the launch, since the launch, and also the future, and hopefully there'll be quite a lot of reflection in here as well, and things that you can get on board with. So welcome, Angelica, to your own podcast.
Thank you. It does feel really, really strange. And I have to say, I'm feeling nervous and kind of don't really know why, because obviously I know exactly what the Voice of Early Childhood is about, and I can just talk about it freely. And I did say to you when we were planning this, it's great if it's spontaneous, and that's how I like to keep my podcast episodes with all the guests. But about 10 minutes before it started, I did frantically start typing up lots of notes. And yes, you are a little bit annoyed that this all happened like 10 minutes before the recording, and now you're looking through them like, oh my God, there's so much there. But just because I think it's the nerves of like, wow, this is different. And actually, it's like me for the first time being a guest, which is really strange, on my own podcast, and talking about everything in the last year and even before that. So yeah, it does feel really strange. And actually, should have introduced you as well. So this is all very different, isn't it? Adam Marycz is the person that's hosting. And Adam is the facilitator of critical discussion for the Voice of Early Childhood. So he's starting to work on the Voice of Early Childhood as of now, really, and not just being a podcast guest and a writer. And he does lots of other work in the early childhood sector as well. That's why it's really appropriate to have him host, but for lots of other reasons as well, which I guess, Adam, you'll go into in terms of the whole kind of where the Voice of Early Childhood started. So I'll shut up and let you lead.
Yeah, no, and obviously thank you for that. Yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to sort of explore this journey, and as we do this, it'll all sort of become clear, the way that Voice of Early Childhood was developed, and obviously how it came from conversations many moons ago, and it'll all become a little bit clear as to why it's the two of us here doing it, really. Obviously, throughout this, I will probably say TVOEC quite a lot, so it's probably important to highlight that straight away, in case people haven't seen on social media a post after my podcast a couple of weeks ago where I think I inadvertently said it. TVOEC is the shorthand for the Voice of Early Childhood, that we've used for a while, and it's just sort of something that I say without thinking. So that will probably be said quite a lot throughout this. Obviously, it has been 12 months of the podcast, doing a podcast every week, and that was a big part of why you decided to do the Voice of Early Childhood and what you wanted to be about. So we'll explore that in a little bit as well. And obviously, you've mentioned about being uncomfortable here today and feeling uncomfortable. And I think that's something that we'll see as a pattern as it goes through as well, that idea of discomfort and that comfort zone aspect of things, and how you're experiencing that right now, the fact that you are deeply outside that comfort zone, how that's really what this is all about. So if we should kickstart this with what TVOEC is. So what does it stand for?
Yeah, so quite a big question, really. But what TVOEC is, firstly, is it's an advocacy platform. So it really stands for advocacy for early childhood, and not just the early childhood sector, but early childhood in general, in the widest sense. So for the early childhood period of children's lives, and it involves everyone that has anything to do with children, not just educators working in the early childhood sector, but families, parents, and anyone else involved with children. And the platform has, as we said, a weekly podcast, articles, and is now working on projects and events. And it's all about, like, the values behind the Voice of Early Childhood is all about accessibility as well as advocacy. So accessibility in terms of the language used. So ensuring that everyone can access the articles, especially. That's something, podcast is a little bit different. It's more of a conversation, a discussion, whereas the articles is something that I always felt like there's so many articles out there. There's a lot of academic journals where early childhood research is published, kind of cutting edge new research, things that we who work with children and who have children need to be aware of. But it's either behind a paywall or it has academic jargon. So we can't really, most people that are not in academia, that are not researchers, can't really understand it. You can't get to grips with what really is this article saying. It's above our heads. Even when I'm reading academic journal articles now as a lecturer to prepare for my students' lectures, even I'm sometimes thinking, I have no idea what this is going on about, that it's just so complicated. So one of the values of the Voice of Early Childhood and aims is to really make everything accessible language-wise. So we have either kind of those academic terms kind of translated or explained. There's explainers at the end of each article and kind of definitions of key terms. So everyone can access it, from those who are new to early years and not qualified educators yet, to parents as well. And obviously doctors and researchers and educators and consultants, everyone can access the articles. And I work with researchers, academics, to make sure that they're sharing their research and their current research, not just something they've already published, but things that they're working on currently, sharing their journeys with the early childhood community, so that bridge between academia and practice, that is now this is where I'm stumbling and and struggling to get my words out. So we have that. We bridge the gap basically between academia and practice, and that's really, really important. And then the other thing that I mentioned, going back to the accessibility in terms of like finances. So so much content out there is free to access, and actually we don't really know, especially as parents and family members, we don't know what we can trust, what is credible, what is research informed. There's so much free content out there. So why should we, as educational content writers, as an educational platform, charge anyone to read our work, read the work of these educators, researchers, when there's so much out there that may be misinforming people out there? So everything is free to access on the platform. Obviously, the podcast is free to access, like all podcasts are really, but every single article is open access, so free. So that's kind of a few of the main values behind the Voice of Early Childhood, as well as really ensuring that it's inclusive and representative of all voices. So everyone is welcome to share their voice. Really ensuring that it's not, like I said earlier, not just for educators, and not just educators come on and talk about their work, or not just researchers and academics or consultants and trainers like what we normally see. They are normally the writers. It is those who are still students, practitioners, childminders, nannies, and also parents, family members, sharing their experiences. Because there's so many intersections, isn't there, in early childhood? There's so many. Of course, the sector primarily is women and mothers. So there's so many intersections between parents and educators, but also other people outside of early years and even outside of education. So healthcare professionals, we need to hear their voices, their experiences, their research, and how it's informing our practice, and vice versa. It's about having those dialogues and kind of collaborative discussions and reflections, and all these things that I'm now saying, reflection, collaboration, partnership, dialogue, discussion. These are the pillars that the Voice of Early Childhood is built on. And that's why it's so hard to really summarize it in to answer that one question. And I started kind of stumbling there straight away, because it's like, okay, I've got so many things in my head. I can't even like keep on track to what I'm saying now about my own platform.
Yeah, I think obviously in the lead up to this podcast episode, I went back and listened to the first one that you did, where you obviously spoke, about what the values of TVOEC were and how you envisaged it, the role that you envisaged it playing, and where you mentioned obviously that the ethos is about self-reflection and shared reflection, and that idea that I know something that means something so personally to you, the importance of reflection. And a quote that I took out is where you said about how learning doesn't happen without reflection, and that you can take information in, but you can't learn unless you reflect on it. And otherwise it is just unprocessed information, so that you can only formulate newer knowledge if you reflect on it. And that is a big part of TVOEC and what you want it to be. You want it to be about that all the time. And that's been a huge part of, the conferences that we'll talk about a little bit later on, having that shared reflection, having all those people together and all the different relevant parties within early childhood that you spoke about there. Obviously I just think back to that story that you told me from the conference this year about the parent who'd come.
So there was, which is such a fantastic moment to witness. There was a father that came to the Voice of Early Childhood conference just a few weeks ago now, and he introduced himself to me, and he did say, actually, I was a little bit worried about coming to an education event because I thought maybe someone will ask, what are you doing here? Are you an educator? And maybe they'll say you're not supposed to be here, kind of thing. And maybe that's what he's experienced before. It's just something that, it's that thing of not being in spaces where you don't feel like you belong, I guess. And that is the whole point of TVOEC, in terms of making anyone and everyone feel like they belong if they want to be part of it. And obviously it's just evidence of this, that this father felt like he could attend the conference, he could try it, and he still had his hesitations. But when I asked, what brings you here, he said that and I hope that this doesn't make me cry now. It did make me almost cry when I was listening to him. I had to be as professional as possible. But he said he has 2 young children, and he just wants to give them the best start in life. And he didn't have the best childhood himself, and he wants it to be different for his own children. So he's here to learn and be the best father that he could be. And I just thought, this is exactly what the Voice of Early Childhood is about. This is exactly what these events are about. And this is why this is what I do, to really make sure that we are making a difference to children's lives, and obviously to people that have anything to do with children. We're making a difference to this father's life. We're empowering him and equipping him to be a better father, like he wants to be, a more knowledgeable father about children's development and their learning, etc. So that was a really lovely thing to hear. It really made me feel like this is why I'm doing all of this.
Yeah, he was sat on my table at the conference as well, and like I say, it was really just incredible to have that conversation and to sort of see that desire and that passion for just, like I say, providing the best that you possibly can, for his children. And ultimately that's, as we discussed before, not on here, but that's the reason that we do what we do in early childhood. Nobody is in this sector for the money. You're not doing it for that reason. You're doing it for the impact on children and their families, and for that improved, outcome, improved well-being, improved, everything that you can think of, improved holistic child and their family. And that just having those moments is so lovely. And the fact that obviously it was someone who'd come to the conference for that reason and been so brave to come to what, like you say, a conference full of educators, I'd be terrified.
Me too.
I'd be so uncomfortable, because it is so out of your comfort zone.
And he had nothing, just to put out, he had absolutely nothing to do with education. I think he worked in construction. So that, of course, nothing to do with education apart from being a father. And he actually found out about the conference on this podcast, so he was listening to it. And also it just makes me think as well, how did he find out about the podcast? So obviously it is reaching parents out there, and it's doing exactly the job that a year ago we wanted it to do. Not just reaching educators, it's not just the same kind of thing out there talking to the same people. It's really influencing more people who don't necessarily access this kind of information, who don't access, like I was saying earlier, research journals and articles around child development and things like this. It's basically, exactly what we want it to be. And it kind of made me think, oh God, how did he find it? But obviously thinking back, all the work that I've been putting in for a year of making sure that it is accessible. It's not just marketing in terms of that salesy aspect, because there isn't really any sales or hasn't really been any of that. So yeah, it is about being accessible and like, I guess, placing TVOEC as that platform that parents can relate to and think, I feel welcome here. That's the main thing.
And something that you're really passionate about is providing the platform for others, isn't it? It's about supporting, the new voices, in the sector, as hence it's called the voice of early childhood. But that's something that you feel really strongly about as well. Obviously I've benefited from that. I've experienced that myself when we met back at, at EYE magazine and then, moved on to do this project and, looking at how you provide those spaces and those safe spaces for people. That's something that is really important to you, and to find those people and to share those experiences of everyone. And I know so far, obviously, there haven't been parents who've been sharing their voices within TVOEC, through TVOEC. But obviously that's something that you would like to encourage and try and find a way to do as well.
Yeah, and it's the start, like this father, that's the beginning of it, and it's not like I reached out to him and invited him. So it is organically growing, that awareness and people, parents, family members feeling like they are comfortable to do so. So there's still so much work that needs to be done there, because actually we always talk about parents. We use the term in quotation marks, hard to reach. Parents are hard to reach, or there are hard to reach parents out there. But actually it's about, what are we doing as educators and, other people like myself, who's no longer an educator in practice. What are we doing to make sure that parents feel comfortable to come to us? So there's a lot of work to do there, still kind of breaking those barriers that are not necessarily there's not necessarily these barriers that are in place with TVOEC, but it's just breaking down those barriers that have been built up for years. Those kind of uncomfortable feelings, or maybe that stigma around maybe fathers going to events or having anything to do with supporting their children and learning about early childhood and things like that. And it's really breaking down all of those difficult kind of, like I said, thoughts, stigmas, views, stereotypes, I guess. Yeah, that just do exist and have existed and are kind of part of a wider system, really.
Yeah, but like you say, I mean, when you mentioned bridging the gap between academia and practice, so it's not just that, is it? The gap that you want to bridge with TVOEC is between everyone, isn't it? It's between everyone who's involved. Again, we had the conversation a couple of weeks ago about Ofsted and the DFE and bridging the gap there between some parts of the sector and that side of it as well. And that is really what matters. And that then digs deeply into where TVOEC came from and the idea of it, and what really motivated you to start this fairly insane journey that you're currently on of launching your own platform. When I was trying to think before, I can't remember when we first had the conversation, like a time frame. It feels that long ago. It feels like 1,000 years ago. It must be 2 years, gotta be now, since at least.
Yeah, it's definitely 2 years, because it did take me about a year. A year before launch, at least, I'd say. Yeah,
when we first had
thinking about the concept.
When like I said, the idea was first floated about what was missing essentially when we were in Bakewell, I think it was. And we were having that conversation then, and you were sharing your thoughts about obviously what you'd seen and what you thought was needed. Do you want to just try and share some of that?
Yes, yeah. So where the Voice of Early Childhood initially came from is the thought that, so for me personally, I listen to a lot of podcasts, maybe not so much anymore because I'm too busy recording and editing and publishing my own. But before, I used to, I really got into a period of listening to podcasts probably in about 2021, quite regularly. And none of these were early childhood based podcasts. None of them were educational. And it did make me think, actually, I do really want to listen to an early childhood podcast, because this is what I do. This is my passion. I want to kind of have more information, upskill myself. I don't want to just be reading when I'm driving. I want to still take in that information. But I couldn't find one that I enjoyed for various reasons. So there are 3 main points why I thought I needed to set something up myself, a podcast up myself. So I felt like a good podcast was missing. So firstly, there wasn't that consistency. There wasn't anything back then, and I'm not really sure if there is now, that was published every single week. So my view of podcasts, and probably many podcasters out there as well, is that, or many successful ones, is that a podcast is about it being a habit for the listeners. So anyone who puts out a podcast wants people to listen to all, like, each episode regularly, wants people to listen to the podcast regularly, and obviously listen to every single episode, ideally. And how people do that is through habit. So if there is a podcast every single Monday that comes out at 6 a.m., you know that on a Monday during your commute, you're going to listen to this podcast, or, whatever time during the week, but there's going to be one every single week and you can rely on it. And that's something that was missing for me in early years. So I listened to the Diary of a CEO every Monday. I knew that was coming out. I was looking forward to it. I'd made sure that I listened to the previous one so I'm caught up. But yeah, that just didn't exist in early years. The other point is that I really wanted to listen to something that's more in depth and really has those critical kind of conversations. You can really dig your teeth into it. And it's not just the kind of thing that we normally hear out there. So not just on the usual topics that are like around, I don't know, like the outdoor environment. I always kind of mention that, or early literacy, but just kind of not really in depth enough, just about provision and environment. And that is all of really important stuff. But actually, it's really about making sure that you as a listener are reflecting and you're challenged, your views are challenged, your practice is challenged. You want to listen to something that makes you think, that makes you reflect, that makes you step away afterwards and think, you know what, I didn't consider this, or I wonder if that's changed my mind now, or I disagree with this. I disagree with what the guest said. So I was really missing something like that I could really think, okay, this has really challenged my thinking. And then the last point is also a good quality recording. So something that is actually pleasant to listen to in terms of the sound quality. So I know for myself from listening to podcasts, there's nothing worse than muffly kind of sounding podcast episodes where you can barely like make out what they're saying. You really need to strain your ears. And then the worst thing for me really is when one person is talking and you've really got to turn the sound up really loud because you can hardly hear what they're saying. And then the next person starts talking and they're shouting because you've turned up the sound on really loud. So now you've got to turn it down and it's constant. And I've heard that happen on even like the podcasts that have thousands of views every month, even the ones that are like celebrity podcasts, etc. And that is just really unpleasant to listen to, and it's unprofessional, and it's just about not balancing out the sound levels. And it seems like such an obvious thing. So yeah, to me, it was like those 3 points, basically, something that I could feel I could listen to for those 3 reasons, something that was going to be consistent, something that was going to challenge me and make me reflect, and something that was actually I was able to listen to, and it wasn't a horrible kind of experience. So yeah, those basically are the reasons why I set up the podcast. And then everything else, like what we talked about, like the articles, accessibility, sharing the voices, all of those things, the conference, that all came about once we really planned the Voice of Early Childhood in terms of like, what we're going to do here. We're actually going to launch something that's beyond a podcast. It could be so much bigger than this. And then once we actually launched, then there were so many other things. Obviously, like I said, the conference was a big thing that wasn't really even necessarily planned to begin with, but it just kind of happened naturally because of all of those values, those pillars that the Voice of Early Childhood kind of was built on, that were not always planned. So yeah, a lot of this was very much like it all happened naturally.
Yeah, I think like I said, the importance of that in-depth conversation, those critical discussions, and self-reflection and shared reflection are embodied throughout every sort of aspect of TVOEC, not just the podcast, the conference, the articles, all that. And something that really appealed to me in the beginning was, the idea that there isn't many topics that you won't go near, that those conversations, like, even if they are uncomfortable, and even if there's, many parts of the sector that are actively avoiding these conversations for various different reasons, that doesn't mean we all shouldn't. Obviously, me, and anyone who knows me knows I quite like a controversial opinion. And I'm open to having those controversial conversations, because for me, just ignoring them doesn't mean they disappear. It doesn't mean that nothing's going to change if we just pretend that the elephant in the room isn't there, for want of a better phrase. And that was something that really sort of appealed when we were having the conversation, was about the idea, well, actually, that through this, there isn't necessarily those restrictions that you might have otherwise. There is very much that, where you can be like, right, like if you believe in something, and when you go back to advocacy, and this was a thread through the last conference again, which we'll explore in a little bit, but if you believe in something strongly enough, do something about it. Like, don't just sit back and assume that someone else is going to, or wait for something to magically happen. Do something, and providing that platform for people to do that, through through TVOEC, through their, through themselves, just providing the space, the safe space for those conversations, because there's a lot of places, and there's not really anywhere else where that safe space exists.
Yeah, and you're so right in terms of when you said there's not those restrictions that you don't have to stop yourself from having challenging or even controversial conversations and talking about controversial topics like you would. So for me personally, I guess, working for other companies and other employers, that was, or just employees. Obviously, I don't have an employer now with TVOEC, but that obviously is that there's a lot to explore there, of like being your own boss and all of that kind of thing, which we might kind of go into a little bit. But yeah, so there aren't those restrictions when you're working for a bigger company, that they don't want to then be involved in anything that is controversial. Of course, they want to protect their brand, their company, etc. I completely understand that, which is why it wasn't possible for me to do anything like this kind of on the side, which was initially the idea. So it is a lot kind of more possible to have these challenging conversations, addressing difficult, controversial, and sometimes topics. But it does mean that it is also still challenging in terms of, so for me, behind the brand, I get challenged in terms of, people saying, oh, maybe you shouldn't be talking about this topic, or you will upset some people, or, this is a difficult conversation to have. There's criticism. And I think that is something that every business owner goes through, especially when they're like public facing, and especially when they're an entrepreneur, when they're trying to really do something different and creating something different, and not just the same thing again. And that is always a challenge. You're always going to be criticized and critiqued, and it's always going to be quite unpleasant. So although you've got the freedom to do what you believe is the right thing and open up these challenging conversations, at the same time, there's a lot of risk involved there, especially personally, just like we talk about with advocacy. So at the conference, it was very much advocacy based, and Dr. Nathan Archer talked about this, and also on the podcast episode a few months ago, he talks about the fact that there is risk involved with advocacy and activism, because you're really exposing yourself to doing something that's beyond the norm, and going out there and challenging societies, challenging systems, challenging what we normally do and hear. And it's difficult doing something that's different, whether it is kind of advocacy based, challenging conversations, being a bit more controversial and standing up for what you believe is right, giving everybody a voice, because actually, and this is the truth in early childhood, we do talk about giving everyone a voice, but not everyone wants everyone to have a voice. There are certain individuals that don't want other individuals to have a voice, because they may feel like they are not that useful in terms of the things that they put out there, or they're not research informed enough, and they may be too controversial. So yeah, that's always a challenge as well in giving people a voice, you do upset people, which seems stupid because, it's only fair to give everyone a voice. But yeah, it's just something that's really hard to balance as an entrepreneur as well. That's something that, outside of early childhood, that's something that so many business owners and entrepreneurs struggle with. And it relates to early childhood entrepreneurs as well, or business owners, nursery managers, people like that. They always go through a lot of challenges, obviously parent complaints and criticisms and things like that. And even a lot of the sector saying that you shouldn't be focusing on like running a business so much, or making money at least. Business is a dirty word in early childhood. So there's a lot of criticism around that constantly. So I think, it's something that is a challenge. There's a lot of challenges there.
There is, and I think that that's all really interesting, especially how it relates not just to, like you say, to TVOEC, but more to business more generally, and that idea of sort of people pleasing. A question I'm going to pose to you on the back of that is: are you scared of offending people, or of publishing something that does get the backup of certain people for whatever reason? That obviously, are you concerned about what that reaction might be if that happened?
So this is a difficult question that I feel like it's very loaded. I've got lots of things in my head already.
Sorry to throw that at you.
This is certainly not planned. I was just thinking when you said I've got a question for you, and I was, oh God, what is this? We've not planned this. So no. I did want us to be spontaneous. What this spontaneous?
As you were talking, I was like, oh God, what? Oh, I've just wondered about if there's any fear inside of when, even not necessarily me, but when someone comes to you with an opinion, they're like, how about this? Do you just feel a sense of dread of, oh dear, no, what could this be?
Yes, but I do certainly feel that. So in terms of offending certain people, certain individuals, there's that definitely. And then also just in terms of putting out a topic or an opinion out there, allowing someone to voice their opinion or write an article about something that may generally be taken, it is quite a challenging thing, or it may be deemed controversial, or it may at least split the sector or society generally in half, and people think completely different things of the topic. There's definitely that, and there's certainly I'm kind of trying to think of two things at once. So I'm trying to think of any examples, but I'll come back to that if I do think of any. One of them, of course, is the Ofsted episode we had. So let's kind of remind me to talk about that. We can both talk about that. But then the other thing is also, it's not just the criticism on me, it's also on my writers or my podcast guests. So I feel like I've got that responsibility and duty to protect them. And I can't remember who it was, but someone did. Oh, yes, of course. It was Jan de Biel. And he did say to me, he's been on the podcast twice or a couple of times now, working with other educators and on different projects that we're collaborating on. So he actually pointed out to me, we had this kind of honest conversation around these challenges. He said, anyone that comes onto your podcast, it's their own responsibility to consider what they're saying. And it's not up to me to protect them or edit them out. And then this is something, again, that's a big value of TVOEC. We don't edit people's voices, views, anything that they share in the articles, things like good quality writing. Of course, I support them with that, and I edit things in terms of the grammatical errors or sentence structure, etc., but not editing their views or their voice, or not making it sound like it's my work or someone else's work. It's still their voice and their tone of voice, their tone of writing, style of writing, etc. And obviously the same goes for the podcast episodes. We don't want to be editing things out. If of course they say something that they're really uncomfortable with and they say, please can you take that bit out, I didn't mean to say that, or it didn't come across the right way, or it seemed disrespectful and that's not how I wanted to word it, of course there's that. But in terms of me thinking, oh, is this going to upset some people? I might just edit that bit out. That's just not fair on anyone, I think. So I guess it is the guest's responsibility to make sure that anything that they say and they are comfortable with putting out publicly.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, I still think it still hurts me if I hear or read criticism, not only of my own work as TVOEC, that the things I publish, but also criticism of that guest or writer, especially when it does become personal, because people do make things personal. And, it's like that in every sector. And especially, I think, in education, where we are all quite highly strung, I'd say. And there's a lot of pressures and there's a lot of challenges. And, that we do often feel like we're treated unfairly. And sometimes it does come out in the worst ways, in terms of, I feel like sometimes in the early years sector, early childhood sector, we do kind of battle with each other too much, rather than actually looking outside and looking at the system. That's the problem. So yeah, there's always kind of that worry that, are we going a little bit too far? Are we being a little bit too controversial? Are we going to upset people in general? Are we going to upset individual people? Or maybe are we going to push people away a little bit from the voice of early childhood, because we're talking about topics, say like even business, talking about business, that I did even have that thought of like, we're having a business series. So we've had one podcast and article released so far by Jordan Tully, who talks about business in early years and recruitment and retention, the usual things, but also really making, like in true TVOEC style, really going into business in early years. What does that mean? How do we run a business? How do we make it successful? How do we make it profitable? And, profit again is a dirty word in early childhood. So for even things like that don't seem to be that controversial in wider society. In education, people won't like you talking about business, because it's not about business, it's about the children. It's about you doing good for the children and families. And, but actually, if we didn't have businesses that ran like businesses and were profitable, we wouldn't have nurseries, we wouldn't have settings for children, because there is just not enough support from the government to make sure that people don't have to run their own private businesses. So there's just the world that we live in, and business does need to exist for the world to exist. This is just how our world is in terms of everything, not just education. So yeah, even topics like that seem like, oh, it's just a usual topic. Actually, there's almost like an anxiety in me of thinking, is this going to push some of my audience away, some of the TVOEC's trusted, built up audience?
I think business is a really interesting point. Because business is challenging, and I currently manage a nursery, and I think part of it is a part of a private business, and I don't necessarily think there's a deep level of understanding there from people who are obviously the different people who use the business to necessarily understand that ultimately hemorrhaging money, making decisions that is going to hemorrhage money is insane, and is just absolutely not something that can be done. And that, the government support isn't good enough. This crowd, we won't go on this 2-year rollout because we'll be here for another 3 hours. But, the fact that there is that lack of understanding around that. I think that it's all about balance, isn't it? And ultimately, whatever you put out there is always potentially going to risk alienating certain people. You can put posts on social media that alienate people. Obviously I have posted things before that has lost me followers. I know friends who've posted different things that you will feel are not controversial in any way, but they'll lose a significant portion of followers as a result. And I think that unfortunately is the divisive nature. And I think part of what, I admire about TVOEC, and also what you do and what you've always done and what you're definitely doing now, is try to provide that space, that voice for everyone. And the fact that, everyone's voice is relevant, and we might not like it, as we discussed about the DFE and Ofsted, like nobody is saying that they are incredible and they're fit for purpose and they're brilliant and we love what they've got to say. However, taking that voice away from them is also deeply problematic in itself, and absolutely sort of goes against the values that TVOEC is, and the values that you believe in, the values that I believe, but also the values of that idea of everyone being, equal and equitable, and everyone having that right to an opinion. If you're then taking that opinion away because it doesn't necessarily suit a narrative, and that is something that is so challenging to navigate, especially when I can't, obviously from my point of view, I can put a controversial opinion to you or to something like that, because it's definitely not, it's your businesses, you're the founder, you're the owner, you're the entrepreneur, whatever word you want to attach to this, and that it's your name being to that, in a sense that is very difficult. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of hear what your immediate reaction was to what that fear is stoked inside, and obviously that, like, it's just one of the things that you've learned whilst on this journey, and there's a lot of them. And when we were talking, about this episode and what we felt should be in this episode, there's a significant challenge that you have faced and do face by owning your own organization, brand, company, whatever you want to call it, that is very much sort of behind the lovely podcast episodes, the backdrop, the swanky website that people really don't see, isn't there?
Yeah, that is true. There's so much that people don't see in terms of, like, and I've experienced this recently with the conference, actually, and that it was really sad, actually. It's kind of like, this is everything that I've wanted, but it's really hard to take. So TVOEC has now become the brand on its own that stands alone, without me pushing it and backing it and giving it that exposure that I have been doing, especially like through LinkedIn and through my network and being an educator and through my contacts. Now it's, people are finding it independently of me as who I am in early childhood. So now they see it as a platform, a company, an organization. So they don't see the people behind it, and they don't see that really there's only one person behind it all full time. And I get kind of help here and there, but it's not like that everything is dispersed. Like, all responsibility is on me. And so many business owners will be able to relate to this, and especially entrepreneurs as well. And it's very much like, if there's, people always share their kind of complaints and negatives. The negative feedback is always shared. People go out of the way to share negative feedback, basically, but very rarely do they share positive feedback. So any complaint is directed towards me, but people don't see that there's a person behind that info@thevoiceofearlychildhood.com email address. Do you know what I mean? So it is really disheartening, people kind of putting out little things, emailing, or kind of making remarks around something that wasn't perfect, but not going out their way to say, actually, this was such a fantastic event, or such a fantastic podcast, or I loved it so much, or it made me think, or thank you for doing this, but there's just one little thing that could have been done better, or whatever it might be. So even little things like that, and little criticisms, really do destroy you as a business owner, as I guess even a content creator, even if it's not like your own business. It does destroy you, especially like when you put absolutely everything into it, your time, your money, any kind of savings. You've got so much pressure, you just put everything, like all of my, like, there's so much impact that TVOEC has had on me personally in terms of my mental health and relationships and everything like this, that it kind of makes you think, is it worth it? And it's really sad, because that's what happens when you turn your passion into a job or, a business. You start to feel like you have to do it, and it starts to cause you hell, and it's no longer becoming a passion and something that you love, because suddenly you need to make money in order to, not even just to pay your bills, but in order to at least pay for itself. pay for all the overhead costs to keep it running. Otherwise it wouldn't be running, because like I said, all the articles are free. The only thing is the conference. And even that doesn't make any money, because my value personally is that all speakers need to be paid, and also they need to be paid the same. So, there's so many things that I do that come from my own personal values that it's hard to balance with running a business. It's hard to make something break even and to keep it going. It's hard that this is not something that I could do on the side, like initially was the plan. And now that this has taken up so much of my time, that it is full time for me. And I lecture here and again, like hourly paid, just to kind of keep me going, and do lots of other little things on the side just to pay my bills. There's a lot of credit card debt and all this kind of stuff going on in the background for me personally. But that's because I've got this vision and I want to make sure that it's fair as well. But it like I say, it just makes it really difficult to balance business and just keeping afloat a platform to make sure that it stays open and it still exists and it doesn't cease to exist a year on, because it's just got impossible to balance. And then balancing that, the business side, with the passion and what I know is right for early childhood, for the early childhood sector, the advocacy, the voices. You can't monetize that. That is not about monetizing it. That's not about business. That's not about making money. So yeah, that side of having your own brand or platform, having your own business, especially one that you believe in and you started because you want to do the right thing, you want to add value, you want to add something that's missing, you want to give something more to early childhood and parents, families and children, and you didn't start it because you wanted to make money. It's really hard, like on a personal level.
Yeah, and I hope sort of, your honesty there will sort of make everybody, not, anyone who supports any kind of business, sort of realize that actually, it is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And, obviously I've seen the toll at times it's taken on you personally over the past, 12 months. And obviously that is influenced by your drive and your passion and your determination to make a difference and to provide what, something that you believe is what is needed for the children, for the families, for the educators, for the sector. Like, you passionately believe in this. Despite at times it being, the most insane challenges. And like you say, it's so incredibly difficult. You are still here 12 months later, 52 podcasts in or whatever, somehow. Yeah, still.
Yeah.
Presented in the same way that you were before. There's currently no now and then shot where you've aged 10 years in the middle.
Yeah.
It doesn't currently exist. Maybe in a couple of weeks. But you don't see that. You are the person behind it. Like, there isn't a team of a dozen people putting this together. There is very much you. And from the idea at the beginning to launch to now to like the conferences that will explore, that is on you. Like the conference day is you, and that's that's a lot. Look at what I watch it, I'm like, there's no way I could do that. No way I could pull that kind of thing together. Like, I just but obviously this time I presented there this year, and that presenting for that 45 minutes was enough for me. Like, the idea of putting the whole thing together is just crazy. But as you said, a conference absolutely was not something that was at the forefront of conversations back when this whole platform was being devised, when it was not even called TVOEC, back when it had a completely different name. Well, not a completely different name, but a partially different name. Yeah. And then obviously then morphed into TVOEC. Conference wasn't a thing then, but you actually decided to do one, and not just that, 2 in 9 months-ish.
So it wasn't even a
So there
year.
was July, and then I remember when after the one in July, you were like, "There's going to be another one in March." It was like, "Sorry, March." Like,
Straight
at
away,
least I was
let's
expecting
go.
maybe a year. I'd never thought that it would be longer than that. But I don't really want to attach the word enjoy to these experiences, but on reflection, you haven't enjoyed them. You have, like we haven't, just to be clear to the listeners, we haven't actually sat down and discussed anything about this year's conference yet, just because of how busy everything has been since. So
yeah, there's a reason for that.
yeah, which maybe, let's cancel the session now.
Really need it.
Have those reflections now. Yeah, we haven't actually had that conversation as to how the difference between last year and this year's conference, and how you feel it went, other than obviously, the couple of reflections on the day, like you alluded to with the father who came before you. Obviously, if you could share reflections without it being too deeply traumatic, then
I might end up like just sitting in the corner and crying by myself after this recording. My partner's not even here like for the next few days, so I'll just be by myself. Like,
I'll check in on you in an hour just to be sure.
But yeah, so there's a few things there. So firstly, I just wanted to say about like other businesses as well, because I mentioned about like me running the business and platform, and it just made me reflect whilst you were talking there. There are so many other businesses out there that have it harder than me. And of course, I'm going to say that because that is just how reflective I am. And, I've not got any staff. I haven't got a team to employ. I'm not responsible for that. So I can't imagine. Well, I can see it. My partner has businesses where he has employees, and it is so hard to have your business when you've got people that you need to pay their salaries. So like that is still something that TVOEC hasn't experienced. So that is something that is yet to come. And what I'm saying is that, it's just about having understanding and empathy for any business owner and any entrepreneur, however small their business. We always talk about supporting small businesses, from someone who's on their own to, a few employees. And it's just having that understanding that whatever business you set up, however small, whatever it's in what industry, it's really hard. It's just so difficult because there's so many challenges. And like with the conference, now going on to that, it's really like, when you were saying, I don't even know how you do something like this. Like, how would you go about like planning, hosting your whole own conference, all of it, not just doing the content planning like I do for Nursery World Show. And that's all I do. Just plan the program, the speakers, that's it, done. Actually, it's everything: the venue, the food, the sponsors, everything. I can't even think like of anything else now, but there's so many little things that you need to think of. And but it really is like you're exposing your whole self to so many people, like on the day, the like even before the planning, and the organizing of it all, and how do they feel, like, is it organized enough? Do they know what they're doing? And even like the decisions around how much you charge, there's so much like judgment there around you as a person, even if people aren't thinking of you as the person. And there's so much afterwards as well in terms of that feedback, the criticism, the reflections. All I can kind of think of is you're just really putting yourself out there. And that's how I felt after this second conference. There are so many things that I struggled with, and I just thought, like, why do I do this to myself? Why do I expose myself like this? Expose myself to things going wrong, things not going as planned, things not going as well as I wanted them to go, even if it's just in my head and no one else can see what I planned. Still, like, there's that self-criticism constantly of like, this is not how I wanted it to go, or this tiny little thing should have been done differently, or, like I f***ed up here or whatever. And it's just, it's just like, why do I put myself out there to be critiqued, to be criticized, to be judged like this by myself and by so many people, just even standing in front of, and lots of presenters, lecturers, and other people will understand this as well. Maybe more so if you don't do this on a regular basis as a lecturer, but like for me, lecturing is completely different to putting on a conference. And even now, sometimes lecturing, I think, why do I do this to myself? And when you're presenting something, and especially when you're doing it and it's all your own thing and you're not kind of representing someone else, and all the responsibilities on you, you're just like, why am I like putting myself out there to be hurt? It's that kind of feeling. And the reason why this second conference was so much harder than the first one, there's several reasons. One is because there were a lot more things involved in terms of there was more to manage this time. There weren't necessarily more speakers, but there was a lot more complexity in terms of having the practice-based strand and the leadership strand in two different rooms, workshops going on. So I had to be kind of managing both at the same time, and the timings and everything. And then the other big thing, so more delegates as well. And then more sponsors. And many people don't see this, but this doesn't necessarily mean more money, unfortunately, just because, they can see that there's X amount of sponsors around the room and they've probably maybe paid this amount. So I'm just going to add it all up, and then the tickets cost this amount. So she's probably making this amount of money. Actually, it's not like that at all. The more things going on, the more costs there are. So actually, you're maybe barely breaking even, if not losing money. So there was a few kind of elements there in terms of like the operational side of things. But the main thing really was after the last conference in July, after that finished, my brain and my body kind of just went, right, that's it now. Like so it was like since last January. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July. So 7 months of like non-stop. Like go. Like we need to launch TVOEC. We're running our own business now suddenly. And I also went for a breakup as well in February, or like early February, end of January last year. So it was very much like my whole life's just fallen to pieces. And I have just left my job and started a new business, which I haven't even launched yet. I'm just running on a little bit of savings that like I managed to save in the last couple of months or year. Credit card debts and everything. And then, like everything that it takes to launch your business, run it, learn all these things, never having had any kind of experience of anything to do with business, having dyscalculia, so like having no idea about like finances and accountancy and all that kind of stuff, really like causing me a lot of anxiety. Planning your own conference, and then so 7 months, and suddenly it was just like, that's it. Like my brain just kind of went, okay, now is the time to actually like fall apart, because you've been falling apart really since January up until July, but you've not allowed yourself to really break down because you had no choice. And you couldn't show that really, especially, like podcasts every single week, recording them. I can't just like turn up looking like I'm dead. And actually, what was it, last night, or when did we have this meeting? Yesterday afternoon, I looked completely different to now. And like even before this podcast episode, you kind of said something, and I was like, did you just say you don't look like you did last, like something about the way I looked or something? And I was like, be careful. But yeah, I was in a state yesterday. I was in such a state, and I've just broken my pen as well because I'm that like passionate about what I'm saying. You can't just, you have to be okay. You have to at least look okay, but you can't just look okay either. You have to be okay to have these podcast episodes and turn up as a host and have these challenging conversations, or at least pose the right questions to lead the podcast episode, appear in front of the camera and then publish yourself to thousands of people. You can't not be in a good place. And even if you don't feel in a good place, but you kind of just about look it, you still have to really push yourself to be okay. Otherwise you won't be able to string a sentence together. And I have been like that. And there's probably episodes that people have thought, what, like she's talking so slowly, like, is she okay? It's because I'm just really struggling, and I have to like stay okay. Basically after July 2023, I just broke down, and I've been in such burnout probably since like January last year, but I didn't like allow myself to experience it and admit it, I guess, to myself until last July. So since last July, I've really been feeling up until now, and I'm still really struggling with burnout. And I've spoken to someone who said they've been through something quite traumatizing, and probably not anything that I'm describing, but they took like 4 years to get out of their burnout cycle, because it is a cycle. You're really burnt out and you kind of feel like, okay, maybe I'm getting a bit better now because I've taken a weekend off, or I've done some self-care or whatever. I've taken a step back from work, and you're feeling a bit better. And then bam, it hits you again. But with me as well, it's like, I can't feel like this. This is not good enough. Like I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough host. I'm not a good enough, anything like this, business owner, or I'm not good enough partner or friend or whatever. I can't be like this. So there's all that pressure you're putting on yourself to get out of that burnout, and it's not even about you anymore. And then you start to feel a little bit better. So then you kind of go again, because you're like, okay, I've got it now. And then you have like 10-hour work days, like you such little sleep, and then you just fall into that cycle again because you've never gotten out of it. So this is why, long story short, this is why this second conference was so challenging, because I was already going into it so exhausted, so burnt out, and I unfortunately didn't enjoy it as much as the last one. And of course, it's not just about me enjoying it, it's about the delegates and the speakers. And from the fantastic feedback that I got, like, it worked really well, and it was better than last year. From, if I look at the feedback, if I look at the numbers of delegates, technically looking at I guess the data, it was better. But in my head, it's like there's so many things that I criticized myself over, and I didn't enjoy it, and I did feel like, why am I doing all of this? So yeah, there's been a lot of challenges, and the main one is that burnout, because you just have to do everything, and there's so much that I don't share, even I guess with you, Adam, that's like, all these challenges that you just can't, because there's just not, you just have to get on with it, I guess. You just have to like deal with it. And then you can't just, if I shared everything every time I struggled a lot, then I'd never shut up like I just haven't done now. You see, you asked me what the challenges are, and I've talked at you for about 20 minutes, if not more.
Yeah. Yeah, look, you are like the pressure that people put on themselves is pretty immense, isn't it? And you are someone who does that person, who does put a huge amount of pressure on themselves, and who does have really sort of high expectations and of how you see something playing out, and you have, exactly. It's like you joked at the start of this, you rewrote the entire thing of notes in the sense of this, because you had an absolute, spontaneity, but also, like ideas and a vision of what you see, and that pressure that you always do put on yourself does lead to that. And it's really hard, obviously, like it's tough to listen to as well. I'm sure people who listen to this all think the same. Obviously it's hard to listen to, knowing about that impact that it has on you. And this has got very sort of Gary, the CEO here.
I guess.
My question before we, try move on a little bit to sort of where TVOEC is now and where you see it going, is obviously, not just based upon what you said about the conference, but the challenges of the entire process. Do you have any regrets?
Wow, I didn't expect that question. I was like, go on, yeah, like, what are you trying to say? What regrets of setting up TVOEC?
No, not necessarily setting it up, but obviously, like, yeah, do you, in hindsight, do you think that, because we've spoken about this before, and I know where you stand on it, but do you think that the pressure that you've put yourself under for the, obviously the podcast every week, the content and all of that, do you regret that?
I don't know what we've said before, what I've said before. Well, you just mentioned we've spoken about this before, but I think we've spoken about it before, and I've not really came to a clear answer. And not certainly like this kind of question in terms of like, do you have any regrets? But I think I do, mainly like mental health wise. Even now I'm thinking like not, I guess, kind of like, what's the point of this? Because if it's going to destroy me, well, I'm not going to exist to carry on TVOEC anyway, so like what is the point? And it's just that thing that we say to everyone really that is struggling, of how are you going to be there for anyone else if you can't be there for yourself? If you're not okay, how are you going to be there for other people? And like, I want to keep putting out podcast episodes that people really value, and the feedback that I get is fantastic, because people say like, this has really opened my eyes. I've already gone back to my team and changed things, and this has really made me question my practice. And parents like that father that we mentioned, and impacting his and his children's lives. So like, it is about doing something for other people, and not just because I enjoy it. Kind of don't enjoy most of it anymore, to be honest. But then there's that other thing of like, well, I want to be okay as a person as well. And I think it's something that, again, going back to being an entrepreneur or a business owner, is something that we all struggle with, because there's just that drive to keep going, but then you think, at what expense? So yeah, it is really difficult, because you think, well, if I stop, then I won't be myself anymore, because I won't be as driven. I won't keep persevering. I won't have this passion. I won't have this is what I am. This is what I've created. It will just have to be something else that destroys me, I guess. So yeah, I have regrets in that I wasn't in the good enough place to set something up to make sure that it doesn't destroy me. But then, are you ever in a good enough place? Like, we're all human. I was just listening back to the episode with Enya last, on employee or educator well-being, and we were saying how mental health is, we all have mental health, and we all have, it ebbs and flows, and like, it's not just like, are you struggling with your mental health, or are you not, or are you that kind of person? We all struggle at times. So I don't really know. I've not really thought about this much in terms of like, could I have been in a better place? I have like regrets in terms of like all of the mental health struggles I've faced, and then how it's impacted my relationships as well. Time with people that I love, or lack of time, and also all of the lack of like self-regulation, and the stress and anxiety. And that's obviously really impacts life outside of work. So yeah, I have like, those are the regrets that I have, but I don't really know like what I could have done about it necessarily, because then I already had to drop that perfectionist mindset. There are so many things that I wanted to do at launch and continue, and some of them I have kind of started and I had to drop because it just was not feasible at all, even with having like help and support. So yeah, there's already dropped that perfectionist mindset. What else could I do? Not do a podcast episode every week. And that is something that we discussed the other day. Yeah, not do one every week, but then that would be defeating the whole point of it being something that I created, because nothing else like that existed. And then it's not something that people have as their habit, as as something that they rely on, as something that they know is put out every single week. It's no longer being consistent. And that is something that I really value as a person, that consistency in everything. Good quality, attention to detail, and all these things. And I just feel like I'd be quitting. But saying that, I always talk about quitting to like my students and anyone else, in terms of like, if you know this isn't good for you, then you need to quit, or you need to know when to quit. You can't keep carrying on with something that is going to destroy you. There's always a right time to leave something, because at the end of the day, your own mental health is the most important thing. So I'm not really practicing what I preach here.
No, and I think, for me, obviously, TVOEC sort of embodies everything that you stand for, and your passion, your drive for this, and as difficult as it is what this is, and what makes the podcast, isn't it? And the fact that you continue, and as do many entrepreneurs, business owners, people continue. The world still goes round, and they continue to put on that face, and to put on that show of that people doesn't see what behind closed doors, do they? And, it's something that people need to consider a lot of the time. I think it's an important thing, an important lesson for life is to reflect on the fact that you don't really necessarily know what's going on in people's heads. And you have to think carefully about what you say to people and how you talk to people and how you support people or don't support them, essentially, because you don't know the kind of impact that has. And, you've just shared very personal reflections and thoughts on, a lot of times in the last 12 months, longer than that, like you say, going back to last January, the challenging times that have been in your life during that period, and how that podcast every week has still been churned out and has still been reflective and thoughtful and part of creating that vision of where TVOEC is today. And obviously I'll just, I haven't really had the opportunity before to sort of just, say about, it seems like there are opportunities to say how proud of you I am and how proud I am of what you've achieved, through TVOEC, but also personally, and the challenges that you do overcome and that everyone does, but sort of seeing how that has played out through the conferences that we've had, which I don't, accept criticism in the sense of that this one was worse than the first one. The challenges were different for this one. For the first one, you didn't enjoy it as much, you didn't like it as much. I don't accept any of that kind of stuff. So I'm not here for that. I'm here for. I thought it was brilliant. I thought the second one was. Was the first one was incredible. Second one was progress. That is always what you're going to see. You're always going to see that change and that evolution and that growth that you are about. The quote from ages ago that you sent me that you wrote about growth and comfort zone, and that is what you're always going to see. And I think that it's really. I know when you're in it, it's really, really difficult. But hopefully, on the back of this episode too, you'll receive some more feedback from people about, just think about the impact that an episode has had, or that a thought has had, or that some part of the conference has had, and that impact is absolutely what you wanted to achieve, and that impact really is happening. And I know, and I guess I just wanted to share that that I am incredibly proud of that, and to be part of TVOEC, and I'm sure everyone else who's been part of it too feels the same. Everyone who was at the conference, they were all there because they truly believe in what you're trying to achieve, and they truly believe in how you're going about it. The speakers, the delegates, they were all there for that reason. Everyone, they might not buy into it, might be the wrong phrase, because it suggests that everyone's pumping money into it, and they're not, but everyone buys into that idea. And whether or not you think that the Voice of Early Childhood is now growing beyond you, ultimately they're buying into you because Voice of Early Childhood is your vision, and that is what they are buying into. So that belief is in you as much as it is in the brand and the company. And obviously where that leads us on to where it is now, 1 year on, and you are not a broken person, and this is still really? A weekly podcast, and half broken. And obviously it's a online platform where there is all the free to access articles that you've discussed. There's the social media. You've just had the second conference, and I don't know what might come next.
Yeah, well, I mean, the third conference is in the pipeline. That's to be honest, that third conference was already in my head, and the topic was already set before the second conference happened. I think it was even December 2023 that I was like, right, third conference is happening, and it's going to be on this topic, because of the various conversations I already had with educators from the field and different projects that TVOEC has started working on, and it just made sense. That's the announcement. I don't know when that will be. We need to still get a venue and set the date, but probably the beginning of next year. So I am giving myself just under a year this time. 2025 conference, third one will be happening, but also lots of other things planned as well, like more in-person events of various types. Again, like nothing set in stone, but lots of plans in terms of working on, so like more practical events, so practice-based, more leadership, and also kind of more business-orientated as well, because that is something that I recognize that there is a gap, and actually we do need to talk about this. And, like we said several times, business is a dirty word in early childhood, but it needs to exist, and we need to talk about how to get it right for various reasons, for the children and families and the sector, but also for the business side of things, to make sure that it's viable, it makes money, we can reinvest back in, etc. So yeah, even the business kind of focused events, that's kind of like, there's plans around that. And then things that TVOEC has already started and that's ongoing and will be happening more of, is working on things that we never really thought about, even that we could work on. So action research projects with different settings, so different academy trusts and local authorities, annual kind of projects, or I should say like year-long projects, with settings sharing their transformational CPD journeys. So from curriculum design and implementation to recreating early childhood environments, things like that. So really documenting the journeys of educators and whole settings and the impact on children and all of the learning that happens, all of the reflections. So really in kind of true TVOEC style, and sharing all of their voices through the podcast, having a podcast series on the projects, and through articles as well, and other various things as well, like video documentation, so going beyond the podcast. So lots of little things like that. What else have we got? That's probably it for now. That's probably enough. Of course, there's also a project we have launching soon with yourself, Adam. Actually, that is really, really exciting. We have been planning it for a little bit now, and we should probably say it's probably about a month away. That will give us some pressure to launch it.
Great,
I'm telling you now, it's a month away.
How about my calendar? Right, okay. Thanks for giving me a deadline.
But that's really exciting, because that will be regular features on the TVOEC platform. And it's something that is very much kind of Adam's vision. So for those that are listening, is something that Adam is really passionate about. Lots of things that you're passionate about, but yeah, like this is something that you're really good at as well. Don't want to kind of reveal it just yet. We'll do a big reveal soon. And so that's really exciting. Yeah, so lots of things in the pipeline. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate, like from the beginning, when I introduced you, Adam, as the host of this podcast, because you didn't even introduce yourself at the beginning. And sometimes I do that still on my podcast. I just go into it and I'm like, oh, some people are listening to this for the first time. Who is this girl? So like it's important for those listening now, that I guess it kind of came back full circle, that Adam hosted this one with me, this TVOEC anniversary edition episode, hosted it for me, because he plays such a big role in TVOEC in terms of the concept, from concept to now. So we did come up with the concept, the name and everything in Bakewell, like you said earlier. And you really challenged me on, if you don't start this, then someone else will, and you're going to regret it. I always remember you saying that. And that is what kickstarted me into thinking, okay, yeah, this has to happen, because I will kick myself if someone else does it before me. And you did actually come up with the name. I know there were several iterations and we were kind of thinking, I'm in an iron about it, but it was your idea. And the logo as well, the sound wave, that was Adam's idea. Just for everyone listening, just give him all the credit for that. There's obviously been a lot of planning in that, but still, like, that was his initial idea. And yeah, just so many things around TVOEC and all the kind of behind the scenes and all my ups and downs. Adam was part of all the voice notes and everything. And I'm really glad that he's working on TVOEC so much more now, or will be so much more now, kind of starting from hosting this episode to the project that we'll be launching, that is going to be kind of Adam's lead. So that's really exciting. And his role is facilitator of critical discussion for the Voice of Early Childhood. So yeah, thank you, Adam, for supporting me, but also for, I guess, helping me create this vision, create something out of that vision that we both had. And yeah, it's very much kind of everyone who listens, who reads and attends the conferences should also be grateful to Adam, as well as as me and anyone else who's kind of behind the scenes as well for this platform. So I just wanted to make sure that people do know that you do have played a big role, and it's not just kind of you appearing as a podcast guest a few weeks ago and now a host on this episode. And if you do want to host more, then feel free. I could have a break. Although this was stressful being a guest on my own episode. I've been a guest on other people's podcasts, and actually I've been absolutely fine, and it's been really enjoyable experience. And this has been stressful at times, only because of the things we talk about, not because of you.
No, well, obviously, thank you so much for the opportunity to host this episode and to obviously part of the journey. And, on a personal level, like obviously the support, and the opportunities and the things that we've worked on together have been hugely enjoyable. And I think it's very exciting where TVOEC can go in the future and where this can lead. And obviously, if I do host any more podcast episodes, just to be clear for all listeners, you're not lurking in the background. They're just there in the corner with your little notes or anything like that, because I don't want to be reading 1,500 words 5 minutes before we start. And there's just really one more thing to talk about here, isn't there? Because we have talked a lot, and that is a little giveaway that we have got in line with the anniversary podcast. So if you want to,
yes,
you've got it there with you, I think.
I have, yeah. So to thank the TVOEC community, so all our listeners, our viewers, readers, event attendees, we're giving away a TVOEC t-shirt, which I have got here. Here it is. So this is the new design. So last year at the last conference, we had our TVOEC t-shirts, and it looked very different to this. So now we've got a huge logo on the front, can't miss it, as opposed to the tiny one, and also a really nice full color one on the back. And I have to say, the material is really nice. Even I was surprised, especially compared to last year's. It's really nice and soft, and it's just great to really advocate for the sector, because that's what it is all about. So the TVOEC stickers that we had, just thinking, do I have any at hand? It's on my laptop, so I can't really show that. So yeah, the TVOEC stickers is on yours as well, isn't it?
It's on mine as well. I was like, oh, can I show it? No, I can't.
So it's really about, I guess, like when people talk about brands that they trust and believe in, and actually my partner put out a post recently around like, what brands are you going to support in 2024? What brands do you really believe in? What brands speak to you and share your values? And it's kind of a little bit about like that, a little bit like that as well, I guess, in terms of really thinking about, well, we're advocating for early childhood, and that's exactly what the Voice of Early Childhood is about, and that's what the kind of that logo represents. So yeah, so for your chance to win your very own TVOEC t-shirt, all you need to do is share your favorite podcast episode on social media. So any platform, just make sure that you tag the Voice of Early Childhood so we can be notified and see it. So you'll be able to find it on most platforms. On all the platforms, it's the Voice of Early Childhood. And then on X, it is the Voice of EC. And you can find, if you need to look at the handles on the website, you can find all of them. They're click-threes on there on the homepage. But please also, so when you share, let us know what the episode is, and also why it's your favorite. Why has it made you reflect? What have you taken out of it? That would be really great to know. And we will pick the winner at random, and the winner will be revealed at the end of April. So less than a month away now. So do get sharing, and we'll let you know who the winner is. Okay, and yeah, that's it, really.
That's very exciting getting to win. Very excited to win your own TVOEC t-shirt there too. So hopefully we'll see some of that on social media as well. It'll be interesting to see the reflections of everyone from their favourite podcast as well, because there's obviously a lot to choose through. So I will be interested to find out what people's favourites are and why that is. And obviously, as usual, at the end of the podcast, just like to thank Angelica for joining us on her own podcast as a guest today. This time, you can go and find her dark room in 5 minutes and have a little moment to recover. And you can find out more about the Voice of Early Childhood on the website, which is thevoiceofearlychildhood.com. The link is in the episode description. And also, if you want to work with TVOEC, or obviously specifically with Angelica too, you can contact her on the website. The email addresses are on there too. So thank you all for listening, and we will hear from you all again soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam, for hosting.